Hey guys, on this episode I'm going to be showing you how I TIG weld stainless steel exhaust together on this GU Patrol that we've got to do a 3-inch full system on. I'm going to be putting a muffler in it and flex joints, V-bands, and we use the Toyota Land Cruiser rubber exhaust mounts, which I think are pretty good. And they hold it nice and rigid, but they don't let it flop around too much for when you're trying to get a big exhaust through a small hole, if you know what I mean. Surefire seemed to like that one. Was that a bit rude?
A little bit.
So over here we got Surefire getting a little bit of space for us. So the first thing that I like to do when we do exhaust is plan the whole route and make sure that where we're trying to go is actually achievable before we go make half the exhaust and then realize that we have to backtrack or whatever. So he's just getting the heater hoses shortened up so that we've got some room on the rear side of the turbo, because this one's particularly close to the firewall for some reason. But yeah, we're just going to get all the room we can. So this is the GU Patrol that we'll be doing the 3-inch stainless steel exhaust on. So, you know, just a run-of-the-mill GU tray canopy. So we'll be doing a 3-inch from the turbo back. So we're going to be using stainless steel muffler, straight through, 3-inch, obviously. Oh, trying to hold it up with one hand, but there you go. Straight through. I actually really like these mufflers. They sound good and they're reasonably priced and they just seem to last pretty long. So I will show you guys the company that I use for all my stainless steel bends as well. I highly rate them, and as you can see, they package everything like they actually care about what you're buying off them. ECS exhaust, these guys are the best. So what I do is I buy a few pretty much all 90-degree bends are the only bends that I buy, and then I end up chopping some in half. So I've got 45s and 90s, and that'll pretty much sort you out through the whole exhaust, and I'll show you how and why that works. We've got a flex joint, 3-inch. This is all from ECS, by the way. We got the quick release V-bands and straights and the exhaust mounts like I showed you. So it's pretty basic. That'll get you pretty much the whole way along. Oh, actually, we've got a 3.5-inch 90 for the tip, and we have a tapered cone which will go from 3-inch to 3.5 for us. So let's get into it. So we got a Mamba turbo, and the rear housing on these are really long by the looks of it. So when you chuck an adapter on it that goes to the 3-inch, you're really close to the heater hoses here. So we've just had to chop them back a little bit because there was a huge straight on them. So we just chopped them back, push it more against the firewall, and now we have a lot more room to deal with. Still not a great amount of room, but you know, there's more. So now I'm just trying to come up with a plan of how we can turn that down. I can almost guarantee I'm going to have to do some pie cuts. So let's have a look into that. We're going to have to do some pie cuts. So to do that, you get your straight piece of 3-inch, and you just draw a straight line right along the length of the pipe, and then you want to rotate it 180 degrees. So to do that, you'll see on the inside of the pipe there'll be like a weld seam. I like to throw that straight down and then draw a line up the top here. I don't know if you can see it, yeah. And then I turn the pipe 180 degrees and I just wait until that weld seam is all the way at the top, just so you have a bit of an idea. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, the more perfect you can make it, better it is in the end. And then you draw your line Again, it might be a bit hard to see on the camera. This is super reflective, but I did a line. And then, if you're doing this with an angle grinder, you'll want to set up an angle gauge so that you know what you're cutting at every time. But I'm going to just do it in the bandsaw. But you know, the principle is the same. So we'll get that in there. I'm going to set, firstly, actually, we are going to set the degrees of what we want to cut to. So depending on the steepness of how quickly you want your pie cuts to angle into, or how tight you need it of a bend radius, that's how steep you're going to do your cuts. So usually around like 7 degrees is normally quite a nice flowy bend. But I mean, you can go as steep as you want, really. I like to try and keep them as minimal, as like small increments as possible, so you have that nice bend. But obviously, if you've got a tight spot, you really need to, step it up and get those bends happening real quick. So we'll probably cut some steep ones and some, 6 degree, 7 degree ones, and see if we can fit it in there. So the pipe is in the bandsaw now. I like to throw this rubber mat in between the jaws, and it just holds the pipe there. It doesn't damage it. It gives you a much nicer cut. So anyways, you can see my line is straight up, and there'll be another line on the bottom, obviously, which is down. I've chosen to set my blade to 11.25 degrees. And the reason is we're going to have to go pretty steep straight away to get it to clear the firewall and those heater hose lines. Okay, so that's the first cut, straight off the straight cut of the pipe. So obviously straight there, and then there's 11.25 on that side. Don't throw the first cut away. We won't be using it, but don't throw these away because they're quite handy. As you do pie cuts, this circle is actually larger than the 3-inch pipe because you're cutting along a longer distance, as you can see. So they're not going to start to meet up perfectly anymore. So keep these for finishing off real complex bends and stuff. But we need to now rotate the pipe 180 degrees, which is why we've done these lines. So we'll turn this until we see our other line straight up, and then we'll set the blade up, and I'll show you what we're going to do then. So the pipe is 180 degrees flipped, and looking from the top down, you can see now what I'm talking about, how steep this really is. So that's going to cut along there. We're going to have like a little 10mm piece here, and then there's this edge here is going to be massive. So real quickly, 11.25 degrees, it really steps up and looks like a lot. So I'm going to go and cut 2 of these now, clean them up in the linisher and stuff, and I'll show you how quickly that bend is going to take form. Alright, so we've chopped up all our pie cuts. I ended up doing 4 just because it's really good to just get them together in the engine bay and start mucking around with your angles and stuff. So as you can see, 4 of those at 11.25, pretty much 90 degrees if I hold it correctly, as you can see. Now when you're cutting these, you really want to keep all these at the same distance. As you can see, so these small sections is what I use to sort of gauge. Otherwise you end up, when you chop these up, if they're different lengths, you end up actually adding material and making this radius take longer to turn. So just keep that in mind. Thought I'd tell you as well, the whole point of doing pie cuts, obviously a bend is much easier. You just, weld it on, done. But the whole point of a pie cut is, so this is the center line radius, a line that is an imaginary center line of the bend. So this 3-inch bend, obviously, if you weld that to the back of the turbo, it's going to come out all the way out over here. The whole point of a pie cut is to try and minimize the distance of that coming out. So a 90 degree with all these pie cuts, you can see how short that is. It's hard to hold, but you can see how short that is compared to that. So we can actually fit in really, really tight spaces like this. That's the whole point of what we're doing here. So I guess the next step is when you get these all deburred, nice and clean, and then hit them with a bit of acetone, and then get them all beautiful. I like to tack the inners and then the outer, and then have that sitting like a 90. If you're doing complex things, you're gonna have to clock these at different ways and stuff, but I'm doing a pretty basic 90 degree turn from the firewall, so I can go ahead and tack this on the jig table and then go have a look at it in the car. All right, that's welded up now. And this is really similar to painting. Making these things look real nice, it's all in the prep work. So you really want to take your time, make sure there's 0 gaps, and just a lot of time here is so much easier later to weld. If you've got gaps and stuff everywhere, you can just give up on it straight away. It's so much harder to do. So as you can see, there's a lot of welding to do already just with this 90 degree bend. So yeah, really want to make sure these gaps are nice. So another tip that I do, you know how in the bandsaw earlier, we lined up that seam? So it really helps. You can see on the inside, that seam I've lined up. I've used it as a tool so that I can see the clocking, phasing of these angles as I tack weld them on. So using that seam, I can see that they're all clocked in the same manner. Just another easy tool tip that will help you throw these together real quick. So I'll show you now. Normal 3-inch bend, and then our pie cut one literally sits within side that. So the difference here is massive. Obviously this is also an 11 degree one, so that's real sharp. You don't really want to be going too much more than that. Otherwise it's going to start getting pretty rowdy on the inside, but it's still a flowy bend. It'll work really good for what we're doing. So I'm going to go see how this sits in the car now. Alright, so I've got the pie cut 90 sitting in there. It does make it, however it's touching these heater hoses. So I'm going to have to come up with a new plan. When you're fabricating things like this, you always got to be on your toes, because there's something that will get in your way. It's never easy, put it that way. If it was easy, everyone would do it. So I'm going to sort of think of a new plan here. I think I'm leaning towards not making these any steeper. 11 degrees is my personal maximum. As you can see, it's a lot. I don't really want to be going any more. So I'm probably going to end up using this adapter, and I'm gonna chop this V-band section, and I'm gonna weld my stainless bend maybe over here. That will give me a decent amount of room off those hoses, and then I'll put a V-band under here where there's heaps of room, and then that will be our adapter. So basically I'm just going to make a new adapter that has a 90 on it. I think that's going to be our solution. So I'm going to get that done, and I'll show you when I'm back. Alright, so we're making good progress with the dump pipe. That's what we've got so far, and I'll show you, it's looking pretty good. So get that in place. So that's gonna roughly how it's gonna sit. Just holding it in place. We now have a much better clearance on those hoses, and I've just gone down and we had to avoid hitting the manifold. So you can see there's a straight, and then I've got a little kink, so it kinks back in, so we can dodge this chassis rail. And I'm going to try and jam the flex joint in there too now. So it's a little hard to show you what I'm doing at the moment because it's quite a tight space, but it'll all make sense soon enough. So with these flex joints, you really want to make sure that, see there's an internal lip, and then on this side there isn't. You want to make sure that the exhaust gas flows from this side and then out that way. Otherwise they'll get caught up in behind here, and these things wear out way quicker if you do it that way. So you want to make sure that you don't have any open lip for the exhaust gas, so it goes this way. She's all tacked up in there. Go down here so you can see. Flex joint, and it goes down to a V-band. So I've got it all tacked up where I want it. Everything snakes around nicely, so I'm going to pull it out now and weld it up. It is good to try and do your welding in decent sections and not leave them too big, because obviously being stainless steel, it will pull around and move. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. It's not good to have a huge, long, tacked together piece, because when you go and weld it, it's gonna, over that long distance, it's gonna move. So you'd really want to avoid, especially in tight spaces, it moving. So this is my final piece that I'm gonna weld up now. V-band on the end, and we've got our hole for the EGT, or we've got our marking for the hole for the EGT. So we'll get that drilled up as well. I'm going to throw some acetone on this and get welding. Alright, there you have it. She's still a bit warm, but you can see it's all welded up. So we'll let that cool down, then we'll fit it up to the car for good. I do need to put the hole in there that I did a little punch for. Just got to put the hole in there and then put the EGT bung in there, and then it'll actually be done. Alright, we got the EGT bung welded on. Let's get this thing back in the car. We're going to put the gasket on as well and do it up tight. This is the final fitment for this fella because we got a V-band on this end, so there's no reason why it needs to come back out. Drop him in. Nice. She's bolted up. Throw some acetone on it to clean it, and then we'll jump underneath and continue the exhaust. Okay, so we're under the car now. You can see the dump coming down there, and we've got the V-band flange on. Now, the best way, in my opinion, to figure out the distance of that pipe is you sit up your 90-degree bend, because we've got to come underneath the clutch slave cylinder. And then obviously we've got to go past the gearbox in that little hole there. So we just get our 90 degree, sit it where we want it to give it some clearance, and then you just get a ruler and measure the distance between those two, and then that'll be our straight. pretty straightforward. So I'll get like that. So I'll get a ruler and mark that without the camera in my hand. And then we'll tack that together and have a look. So this is the straight section that we've just measured up, and that's the size that we want. And then we've got the V-band down there. And so there's just a tiny little lip on the inside of these V-bands, and then that is where the 3-inch pipe will sit into, and then you just weld along that. And then our 90 will go above that. So the best way to tack this up is we'll get some tacks on this, and then we'll get some tacks on the 90, and then we'll go make sure that it sits really nice in the car, and then we can weld it all up. And then I like to keep these sections getting welded up quite frequently, because the longer it is, the more of a mission it is to organize in a nice manner to get it to weld. Whereas if you just have like a nice little section like this, you can basically throw it in your V-block and start spinning it and welding it, and it's super easy instead of having a big old attachment hanging off it and crashing into the table and stuff. So it does save time to actually just keep welding continuously as you go. Obviously it helps to get things tacked into position sometimes when you got tricky sections like getting through here or going over a cross member or going up here. You do want to have a bunch of tacked in pieces to make sure that it all fits, but you know, when it's a pretty basic 90-degree turn, I like to just get it welded and get it done. That way it can't change the movement or anything of the rest of the exhaust. So I thought I might talk about wire thicknesses too. So in my hand I've got 0.9 and I got 1.2. I like to use the 0.9 for running the TIG with two flats like that. When you have pretty much no gap, I use the 0.9 to do that bit. It just sits flatter and it looks nicer, and you can keep the heat down. Whereas when you do a flange and you've got see this little gap here, and you got a thickness that's much larger than 1.6 on the stainless, I like to use the 1.2. It just fills it a bit more and it sits in there nicer. And also actually adding a thicker filler rod will cool the weld down. So that's just my preference, and that's what I do, and I like the results. So yeah, that's how I do it. So that's tacked together. Got that guy there, that one there, and then we got 3 tiny little tacks. So I like to keep them as small as possible. That way when you run the weld over it, you don't even notice that the tacks were there. Like, tacking the job together is pretty important. Like, you want to, that's the part that's going to determine how nice the weld is. If you've got gaps everywhere, it's just going to be harder to weld. So as you can see, I got 0 gaps, so it's going to be pretty easy to weld. Simple as that. Alright, so we've got our dump section coming right down with the 90-degree turn, and now we need to get to the rest of the exhaust. So instead of just guessing what bend is going to go here and then what bend is going to go there, I like to throw in, sort of plan out the future of the exhaust. So I've got this 1 meter straight, which is actually going to be pretty close to where it's going to sit. And then we're going to have a muffler here. So I'm jumping over the subframe for the gearbox, and I'm jumping over the chassis subframe here. And I'm liking all the clearances and stuff. So I've just got the stands, and I just accurately put it exactly where I want it. Now I can actually line up and figure out how we're going to go from there to there. So what I like to do with exhaust systems, just to keep it simple, is I like to work in 90-degree bends and then 45-degree bends, so chopping that in half, and then 22.5, which is just half of 45. That way you get, it's a lot more simplified, and you don't have like random 37-degree bend and then a 21 and then and it just gets really confusing. So the way I like to work with exhausts is, once you make a bend and you need to go somewhere, you need to adjust the pipe in height or side to side or whatever, I like to just do a bend, and then I like to just do the exact same bend opposing and bring it back to that neutral straight position, and it keeps things really simplified. So what I mean by that is we're at 90 here and we're at 90 here. So we want the 22.5 to go up, and then we want the 22.5 to go back into this pipe. So we've obviously got to dodge the slave cylinder there. So we're going to measure out the first straight for the 22.5, and then once that's in, we can tack it or use our tacking bands, and then we get our other 22.5 and figure out the straight for there, and then we can actually tack all that together and they should line up perfectly. So it just saves guessing and trying to figure out what you're doing there. You just kind of work. I always like to work by doing a bend and then bringing that bend back to that neutral position. Okay, so here's another tip that just happened. So I tacked this side, it was all good, and then went to go tack the other side, and this side started pulling up and I couldn't get that tack on it nice. So I had to add some filler rod and then push down on it, and it was quite ugly and bubbled up. So instead of just leaving it and then welding over it and then it gets all clumpy, I just went over to the linisher after it was tacked and then just gently took the edge off that tack. It's really hard to see, but there's no raise in it. And then I hit it with the Scotch-Brite air tool, and then I hit it with the Scotch-Brite, where is it? Just with your hands, and then now it's actually completely gone. So when I weld over that now, you will not see where that horrible tack was. And I mean, you don't have to do that, but if you just want it to be perfect, sometimes your tacks don't go the way that you plan. Anyways, so we did the measure, and that is the straight section. That's going to go there. And then we can now get a tacking band and put it there, and then we can also still clock this with the tacking band. We can also clock the V-band. I've just got it medium tight so that I can still twist this. But yeah, we'll get the tacking band there and we'll clock that, and then we can get our other bend and then look at the next straight section. Okay, so again, we got our bend and our straight, and then that slips up in there. And once you just give this a little bit of a, because this is on the flexi joint there, once you just give that a little bit of a nudge, she lines up absolutely perfect. Let's see if we can show you. Yeah, see how there's quite a bit of movement. It's really hard to show you guys with one hand, but yeah, believe me, goes up and sits really nice with two hands. So the reason that I work with the little straight and then a bend, straight and a bend for this sort of stuff is now we can easily clock this so that it's perfect. That's obviously tacked on the bend, but the straight can now actually be rotated until it's in the right clocking, and then we can tack it, and then we can slide our tacking band to the next straight. And then if we have this bend just tacked on the bench, we don't actually, because obviously we don't need, on the bench we don't need to know the correct clocking for this bend onto the straight. You just tack it on. And then we can chuck it up in here with the tacking band, clock it until it's correct, and then tack it on. That way, there's no texture marking. You don't have to refit it 1,000 times. You can just put it in once, and then you know it's going to fit. That's the easiest way to do it, and that's pretty much the whole principle of what we're doing here on the exhaust. Is we are trying to use the tacking band to clock the angles with the straights, if that makes sense. It's a little bit confusing, but once you've done it a couple times, it makes perfect sense that way. So, like I said, this fella on the tacking bench, the welding bench I should say, tack him on, and then just repeat this job over and over again. So now you can see what I mean. We just tacked up that guy, moved the tacking band over here, clamped it on, clocked it so that it meets this. Obviously this has got a big section here hanging off that little flexi joint, so I can actually move this right now. So if I push this up, it actually pushes that flex joint into that back to the neutral position, or like 0, and you can see it lines up fantastic. So that means I can go ahead and tack that, and then again we can move this to up there and do the same. Now that that's fully tacked up, we've only got a straight section that goes all the way to the muffler, so we don't actually need to tack this in place, because we can take this off on the bench and then we know that that just gets tacked, and the clocking of that is irrelevant. So I'm going to pull that out, and then we're going to tack that last piece together. We're going to fully weld all this, and then we're going to refit it. And we're also putting a V-band here. So I've marked where I want it. It's just a good amount of space. I like to put V-bands where there's plenty of room, because they're quite chunky fellas when they go on. So we're going to put the V-band there, and then that will be quite a long section. We don't want to make it too tricky to get in and out. So that once that goes back in as well with the V-band, that'll be final fitted. So that means we're basically up to the muffler and shoot over the diff stage. So we got it on the bench. There's the bit that comes off the dump into the little step up from where the clutch slave is. You can see there's absolutely no gaps, so that's going to be real easy to weld, which is what we want. See, no gaps, very nice. Now before we put this big straight piece and tack that on to the short section, we do have to put a V-band on it. And the reason that I'm going to do the V-band first is because then we can just put this big straight pipe in the V-blocks, and we can rotate and weld this whole band up, and we won't have this big old bend on the end of it trying to clank into the table as we rotate. So it's really good to just think ahead and get your plan of attack in the right order when you're doing all this stuff. It makes it easier to weld, the welds will look nicer, and it's quicker. So it's a no-brainer. So I'll weld the V-band on, then I'll put that over here, let it cool, weld this little section up, and then the very last weld will be this one all the way up here, which goes to the end here. Alright, so you guys know the deal now. We have our muffler in place where we want it, and we need to make a hanger for this. So the first thing I like to do is we'll get the straight piece measurement for here, and then we'll get that V-band for that section and weld it onto the straight, because obviously again the clocking doesn't matter. So we'll tack that on and then offer it up and then sit it up against the muffler, and then we'll get this muffler sitting nice and straight. Then we'll tack that, and that way the muffler is a bit more captive than just sitting on these stands. And then once we've got all that tacked up, we can make our muffler hanger, and then we can take it off, weld it up, and we can continue on. So let's get that straight there, measured up and welded to the V-band. Alright, that is tacked up. Now for exhaust mounts, I just use these ones off the shelf that I make off the plasma cutter, and then we just use a Land Cruiser exhaust rubber. I like these a lot because they don't wiggle around heaps, so they keep everything nice and firm where you want it, but they do allow for a little bit of movement, which is perfect. So now that we've got our exhaust mount bolted to the chassis, so I actually make these for GU and GQ. So if you actually want one of these, I can actually cut it up and send it to you, bend it up and send it to you, I should say. And then the exhaust mount just slips right in it. And then we fold up this little bit of Stano, and then he just sits right on top of there. And then as you can see, I've got a relief cut out of it, so that can get welded up now, and she'll sit pretty. All right, so our exhaust mount is in and tight. You can see what we've done so far. Got a good amount of movement in the little joint. So, I mean, the next step is basically 45 and then go up into another 45, and then we're going to go into next to the mud guard here, and we're going to come out through here. So basically the steps are the same as what we did here. So we're going to go a 90-degree bend. We're going to chop it in half. So we have 45, 45, and then we're going to 45 into the guard, 45 back straight. So it's like simple steps to where we want to go. Alright guys, so muffler final bolted in, and that up section goes to a V-band. Now, I needed to put a V-band in because this section is just too long and too tight in there to be able to get this whole thing out. So we've got a V-band there. And another good thing to remember is you should try and strategically place your V-bands so that it actually helps you in the future of making the exhaust. Obviously you want them to be in a good spot too, just for convenience of doing them up and they don't rattle and stuff. But you can also think about making the exhaust. So I decided to put the V-band over there because I can now like clock this and it's gonna center it up within here, so, and not affect anything else. So I just did that up nice and tight then because I'm happy with the placement. So all we have to do now is have a little bend, and then we're gonna go out to 3.5 inch and dump. Simple as that. Okay, so now that we want to go from a 3-inch pipe to 3.5, I just got a bit of scrap so you can see. We've got to use like an expander. So this is 3 to 4 inch, and obviously this goes 3.5. So I just get the 3.5 inch pipe, a bit of scrap, and slip it over the top. Get it nice and square. And you can see if you don't just go ahead and mark that now, because if you use a ruler or a straight edge and you come down, you can see that it actually comes off a fair bit because it's going on the inside, and we want it to be the same as the outside diameter. So you just get your ruler and go down until it touches, give her a mark, and then we can get our texter and hold your hand nice and steady. Look at that. Easy. So you can see how good that worked. Nice and flat, exact same diameter, perfect. So now we can weld the little angle on it and get it up in the car and tack it together. Alright, we're getting there guys. So we've got the 3.5 inch, and there's a 90-degree bend that I just sliced the end off just to give it some shape. That's going to be the tip. It's going to sit like that. So now we're just going to tack that on, and then we can take the last piece of that exhaust puzzle out, fully weld it, and then final fit it, and she's done. Let's get into it. Alright, so I've just bolted it in for the last time. It's looking really good. I'll show you over here now. Just wiped it down with some acetone, because once this thing goes through some heat cycles, if you've got fingerprints on it, it won't, they won't disappear. They'll just get embedded into the steel. So, oh yeah, it's easy as that. It's not really easy, but you know, it takes a bit of practice, and it becomes easier. Yeah, so looks really good. Alright guys, that's going to wrap that video up. I hope you enjoyed it, and let us know what you think. I'll probably do a bit more of these videos of sort of the intricate parts of what we do here. So let me know if you want to see some more of this stuff. But yeah, that's Exhaust Stainless Steel Custom 101.